Roller coasters are typically made out of one of two materials. I believe most of them are made out of steel, but some of these roller coasters are made out of wood. Today, I will be ranking all of the wooden roller coasters that I have ridden. Keep in mind, however, that I have not ridden a whole lot of wooden coasters. Some of these coasters on this list are now defunct, and all of these roller coasters, at the time that I rode them, the track was made out of wood. So anyways, let's get into this list. At the number 8 spot, we've got Georgia Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia in Austell, Georgia, near Atlanta. So this was a Din wooden coaster that is no longer in operation, and it was one of the few big coasters that I could ride during my visit to the park when I was 8 years old, and that's actually the only time I've been to the park. Let me tell you, I am so glad they removed this thing, because this roller coaster, as well as the now renovated Ninja at the same park, are probably tied for my least favorite coasters. Like, this ride is so unbearably rough and shaky beyond the point where it's enjoyable. Like, it was just terrible when I rode it. Like, oh my gosh, I am so glad that's the only time I've got to ride this coaster, and I'm so glad that I can never experience this again, because it was just a nightmare. So yeah, this is in last place out of all the wooden coasters I've ridden. This is at the bottom of my list. At the number 7 spot, we've got Cheetah at Wild Adventures in Valdosta, Georgia. So, this is a roller coaster that was hard for me to rank, because I've only rode this coaster once, and it was when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. So it's very hard to judge it based off that one experience so long ago. Now, I remember when I rode this, I hated it. But I think the main reason for that is because I thought it was scary at the time. Now, if I had rode it like a few years later, I think I would have enjoyed it more. I mean, because the layout looks solid. However, the ride, I think I vaguely remember the ride being rough, and based on this footage you're seeing, the ride does look really rough. So, now this roller coaster, this CCI wooden coaster, it is no longer in operation. Wild Adventures, a few months ago, they announced that it was no longer going to be operating. So, anyways, I think this ride probably deserves this spot, considering I had a bad experience, and even nevertheless, it looks like a super rough ride, even though the layout looks solid. At the number 6 spot, we've got CoasterForce at Legoland, Florida in Winter Haven, Florida. Now, I rode this coaster during my one and only visit to the park when I was just under 8 years old. And honestly, I'd say I enjoyed this ride. Now, I don't remember it a whole lot, but I do remember enjoying it. Now, I rank it this low because it's not really a memorable roller coaster. I mean, unless it's like your first coaster or something. Because, like, this is just a family wooden coaster. However, I do rank it above the other two coasters on this list, the previous two coasters on this list, because this ride, for one, it's not unbearably rough or shaky. I don't even remember it being really shaky or rough. I mean, like, I just don't really remember that. But also, I just didn't have a bad experience on this ride like I did with, like I said, the previous two rides. Both my previous two rides had bad experiences. But yet again, I actually, like, enjoyed this coaster. But it's definitely not deserving of anything above this, because the other coasters on this list, the ones ahead of this, I'd say they're just more overall fun. So even if some of them are more rough than this ride. At the number 5 spot, we've got Great American Scream Machine at Six Flags Over Georgia in Austell, Georgia. This is another one of the few roller coasters I got to ride when I visited the park when I was 8 years old. Now, this roller coaster I also found to be a rough wooden coaster. However, it definitely wasn't as unbearably rough as the Georgia Cyclone was. And I remember this ride at least being like a decent ride. I believe it was like a pretty mediocre ride. Now, I'm sure if I re-rode this, I might enjoy it a little more, because I probably have a slightly better roughness tolerance. Like, it looks like it would have some pretty good airtime, but otherwise it looks like a pretty standard old wooden coaster. So yeah, I'd say that's why I rank it the number 5 spot. At the number 4 spot on this list, we've got White Lightning at Fun Spot America in Orlando, Florida. Now, I'd say we're actually getting into the good wooden coasters here. So, I rode this ride during my visit to Fun Spot back in early 2018, and I remember thinking this was a pretty fun, solid wooden coaster. Now, I will say I had less of a tolerance for roughness back then, so I feel like my experience would probably be a little better if I rode it now, because this ride has definitely a solid layout. Or not even a solid layout, I'd say a great layout. But this ride, I'd say, is just an overall good and fun ride. So yeah, I would recommend riding it if you're in the Orlando area. So yeah, I'd say this is a fun ride, and it is deserving of the 4 spot on this list. At the number 3 spot, we've got Mind Blower at Fun Spot America in Kissimmee, Florida. This is a Gravity Group wooden coaster that I think it's better than White Lightning. However, it is, I believe, a rougher wooden coaster. It was definitely rough. However, I have grown a bit of a tolerance to roughness, and I'd just say the overall layout just makes up for this. This is the only wooden coaster that I've been on that has an inversion. It has a 0G roll right after the drop. So this ride is just, I find it to be a lot of fun. My only complaint about this ride, I think I came into this ride expecting to get more airtime, so I kind of wish the airtime moments were greater. But other than that, this ride is just overall a fun coaster. Now, I do have one thing to say, and apparently my dad rode this ride, and he almost got a serious leg injury due to the car in front of him hitting his leg in a certain way in which his leg almost got stuck there. So I believe if that's the case, if this is happening, then Gravity Group and Fun Spot both need to be made aware of this, because this might be an issue with the Gravity Group's trains on their coasters. But other than that, this ride is a great ride. I would not recommend it, though, if you don't like rough rides, because like I said before, it is a very rough coaster. But it is a fun coaster in my opinion, so I really like it personally. At the number 2 spot, we've got Thunderhead at Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. This is a GCI wooden coaster, and I'd say my opinion on this ride has changed from my first visit to the park to my most recent visit to the park. So the first time I visited this park and rode this ride was in June of 2017. And when I rode this ride, I remember thinking it was a pretty solid, pretty fun ride, but I also found it to be rough. And like I said before with White Lightning, I believe my roughness tolerance was a bit lower back then. And I think I hear this ride was a little rougher back then because supposedly Dollywood has done a retrack of this ride. However, I will say during that visit, I had a good experience on this ride because I rode it with my cousin who never really rode big coasters, or at least none that he liked, but he rode this ride, and this was probably the first big coaster that he enjoyed, so it was fun riding with him and enjoying it with him. However, my most recent visit to the park, it was back in October of 2020, and I found this ride to be a whole lot better than I had remembered it from my visit prior. Because I believe Dollywood may have done a partial retracking, like I said before, but this ride felt a lot smoother than I had remembered it, and it was just jam-packed full of airtime. It was just so much fun. I really liked it. I'd say this is my second favorite coaster in the park, just behind another roller coaster that is just ahead of this coaster on this list. But yeah, overall, this is such a fun ride. Definitely ride it if you go to Dollywood. You will love it. And finally, at the number 1 spot, we've got Lightning Wood at Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Now, this RMC coaster is not only my favorite wooden coaster that I've ever ridden, but also my favorite coaster overall that I've ever ridden. Out of all of my 67 coaster credits, this one is it, right here. Now, keep in mind, at the time that I rode this, it was before RMC renovated it, so it became partially a hybrid coaster, where parts of the track were made out of steel, because I only got to ride this ride in June 2017. I didn't get to ride it during my October 2020 visit, because it was currently under that renovation. So I'm going to be relying on my ride experience from 4 years ago. However, this ride I remember being just absolutely fun. It was like completely out of control, especially on the quadruple down. That's probably my favorite element on any roller coaster because of just the insane amount of ejector airtime it gives. Also, I believe when I rode this ride was in its prime because I think the trims weren't as harsh based on what I've heard. So I haven't experienced it when they made the trims even harsher. Like at the top of the launch, that's what I'm talking about. But yeah, overall, this is just an insanely great ride. I'm so glad I got the chance to ride it, especially since at the time I rode it, it had dealt with like crazy maintenance issues for like a year, because it was like open for only a year at the time, and it was still dealing with some crazy maintenance issues. But other than that, like, it was just such a great coaster, and I'm so glad that I got to ride it. So that's all for this video. If you want more content like this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications to get notified of my newest and latest uploads. I'll see you guys in the next video.